Dag sê en hartlik welkom by Reguit met Robinson hier op Litnet. Die tweestryd in die ANC tussen die geskorste sekretaris-generaal Mbeki en president van die party Ramaphosa raak by die dag erger. In die jongste verwikkeling het Ramaphosa geëis dat Mbeki hom om verskoning vra vir sy optrede verlede week toe hy in 'n brief aangekondig het dat Ramaphosa ook geskort is. Die nasionale uitvoerende komitee van die ANC het vroeër verklaar dat Mbeki en die ander lede van die party wat aangekla word van ernstige misdade binne 30 dae op sy moes staan, so nie sal hulle geskort word. Ramaphosa sê Mbeki het geen reg of mandaat gehad om hom Ramaphosa te skors nie. As hy nie om verskoning vra nie, sal verdere stappe volg. En dit kan permanente skorsing behels. Intussen is Mbeki ondersteuners in die Vrystaat, waar Mbeki die premier was, en in KwaZulu-Natal besig om steun te werf vir hom en hulle beplan padversperrings in hoofweë in die Vrystaat. Mbeki hou vol, hy is nog sekretaris-generaal omdat hy appel aangeteken het teen sy tydelike skorsing. Hy staan tereg op verskeie klagte van bedrog, korrupsie en geldwasery. Ons gas is professor William Gumede. Hy is van die Skool vir Regeringskunde by Wits en uitvoerende voorsitter van die Stichting Demokrasie Werk. Welcome, Professor. Nice talking to you. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as our guest. First of all, are we going to see a split in the ANC?
No, thank you for having me. I think we may look at it, towards the medium to long term. There's possibly another split coming. Clearly, because, we are now seeing two groups in the ANC that are irreconcilable. There's no possibility of a reconciliation. It's, the ANC is divided into two groups. So the one group is the Mbeki group, which includes former President Jacob Zuma. They are populists, or we would call left populists. That's the ideology and the outlook on life. And then you have Ramaphosa with his group of people. They're sort of moderates, centrist, social democratic groups of people. Now, in the past, when the ANC was a liberation movement, these type of groups could live in one party. But when you're a governing party and you have to make decisions, you cannot have two such diverse groups within one party. And for up to now, they have been cohabitating in a very artificially. And I think, we're now coming possibly to the end where either one of the group take control of the ANC and kick out the other group.
But we know there is an election on the 27th of October. This is probably a little bit too early to have a split in the party now before those elections.
I think I suspect the elections will just slow down the process because, they will try to somehow just patch things together publicly just to run an election campaign. But I can assure you that this time it will be very, very difficult, really, because they're so divided to run an effective leadership campaign. Now, what comes up, if you hear some of the recordings that came out of the ANC-NSC meeting, it's clear that the Mbeki group want to call an early national conference of the ANC, and they would like to have it ideally, in their view, before the local government elections in October. Now, a national elective conference, an emergency one, is allowable within the ANC constitution, and it has been hosted before during a crisis when the ANC was in exile. And one particular one that one could remember is the Morogoro Special Conference in Tanzania that happened when the ANC in the 1960s when the party was in exile. So possibly such a conference then will then have a contest of the leadership, and where then the Mbeki group versus the Ramaphosa group, and where the Mbeki group will then try to use Ramaphosa as leader of the ANC and take over the ANC. So that's the one option on the floor. Failing that, they will then try to have that elective conference next year, early next year, to try to do the same.
But the majority of the people in the NEC must probably ask for such a special conference.
Absolutely. That's going to be really the difficulty. Who is going to make that decision for a special conference? Now, at the moment, Cyril Ramaphosa clearly has a dominance in two structures of the ANC. He has a dominance on the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And unfortunately, it's a very slim, it's a slim margin of dominance. So, you know, he doesn't have an overwhelming victory or majority on that. And then the second structure of the ANC, which is a powerful structure, is a parliamentary caucus, where clearly also Ramaphosa has dominant support. So, so what could happen? Either the National Executive Committee can make the proposal, or even the party's parliamentary caucus. But there's also an alternative, which is very complicated. It is for the branches of the party, so enough provinces to call for such a conference. So I think that is why Ace Magashule, knowing that he won't be able to convince the ANC's NEC, because they're under control of Ramaphosa, even if it's a very small majority, and he cannot also persuade the ANC's parliamentary caucus, because there Ramaphosa also has the majority. So what he will try to do is to get the provinces, the majority of the ANC's provinces behind him to make such a call.
We know over the past few days, Magashule tried to actually attend meetings of the NEC, and he was prevented from doing so. What is the significance of that?
You know, the significance really is more, I would say, technical. It's a conflict of interest because, you know, he was under discussion. So really, it wasn't really a political significance, but much more of a conflict of interest, where he was on the agenda of the meeting, and that they argued he should not be in the meeting. So from his point of view and in his supporters' point of view, they don't look at it as very significant. Although, having said that, it is, of course, you know, he wanted to be there to voice his opinion and persuade many more NSC members. And that's why you saw him on Friday ahead of that NEC meeting. He had his own press conferences, he had his own media briefings, because what he tried to do, he tried to dominate the debates and the discussions ahead of you know, that NEC meeting where he was excluded, almost to try to influence it from outside. And secondly, what he tried to do is to argue, well, the NEC can go on there, but he is going to try to go above the heads of the NEC members for the heart and soul of the ANC, ordinary membership, and the branches and the provinces who were not at that meeting.
Where is the heart and the soul of the ANC at the moment? Is it in the center? Is it on the left? Is it on the right? The radical economic transformation people say Cyril Ramaphosa wants a right-wing kind of coalition. Do you believe that?
Most probably the heart and the soul of the ANC is totally corrupted. It's nowhere at the moment. I think that really is the reality. You know, in the past, we could talk about a battle for the soul of the ANC, and the soul was, you know, at least my view of it, was the sort of contest over policy, different ideologies and so on. But I think we've now lost that. This is really not a contest over policies or over ideology either. This really is a contest over power, to take control of the ANC. The Ace Magashule, the Jacob Zuma group, want to take control of the ANC. Then when they have control of the ANC, then to not necessarily implement their own policies, but use the resources for their own advantage. And secondly, you know, to override all of the prosecutions against them. You know, Jacob Zuma, when he was the president, he successfully undermined the judiciary, the prosecuting authorities, the police, by appointing his own people, puppets, so to speak, and then, you know, either defer his investigation into corruption, or either just stopped it, not only into him, but many of his comrades. So I think the Ace Magashule, Jacob Zuma group want to do that again. So this is a contest, really, not really for the soul of the ANC, but for control of the ANC, so that it can be used, the state, access to the state for, you know, self-enrichment, to protect themselves from prosecution, and also to get back at their own opponents within the ANC.
Just on a few technical points, is Magashule still the Secretary General or not?
Well, that's I mean, the ANC's National Executive Committee believe he is not the Secretary General. He believe, and of course his supporters believe, he is the Secretary General. So almost the only way that this dispute can be resolved, I think what will happen now, Ace Magashule is likely to go to the courts, you know, to appeal, to ask the courts to show who is right, who is he still the General Secretary, or if he's not. And then also secondly, the reason why Ace Magashule will go to the court is also to buy time, because it's from his strategy point of view to take control of the ANC, he needs to almost remain in control of the General Secretary position, because it gives him control of the ANC machinery over the branches, over the provinces. So that is why for him, this is almost, you know, a life and death fight to retain this position. So if he goes to the court, and if the courts, you know, the court process is often quite long, and that will then give him the opportunity to say, well, actually, it's still the General Secretary, while the courts make a decision. It will also then give him enough time to lobby for a special national conference of the ANC, where there could be elections, and where he would hope he could triumph, possibly become the president of the ANC, eject Ramaphosa as president of the ANC.
But he has appealed against the ANC decision to get rid of him. But who will hear such an appeal? When and by whom will it happen?
So the ANC has an internal disciplinary committee and an appeals committee. So you know, within the ANC constitution, the party can also set up a special tribunal to hear such appeals. So that's the one way. The second process would also the ANC's Integrity Commission, although they won't hear appeals, but it's very likely that there's going to be a special tribunal within the party. Now, of course, such a tribunal will be from a Ace Magashule point of view. He could also reject such a tribunal. He could say, well, most of those members in such a tribunal are Ramaphosa supporters or affiliated to Ramaphosa. So that is why we can't rule out Ace Magashule going to court, to have the courts decide on it. Not necessarily because he believes in the courts, but it really would be to buy more time, so that he can still be in control of the ANC as a general secretary of the party when there is a special national conference, if it takes place.
Do you personally believe that the charges against Magashule will stick?
Absolutely. I mean, clearly, I mean, if you hear from National Prosecuting Authority, I remember, I mean, Ace Magashule is a very powerful individual in the ANC, in the country. I mean, he's essentially the number 2 after Ramaphosa in the ANC. So when they charged him, when the NPA charged him, they were absolutely certain, that they've got their ducks in a row, that the case is solid, because a National Prosecuting Authority doesn't take on a heavyweight political individual without absolutely certain, that it is a solid case.
One wonders, how is it possible that a man with such charges against him can still be so popular?
No, you must remember, I think people may forget that Ace Magashule has been a long survivor of political battles within the ANC. I mean, this is not the first time that there are allegations of corruption around him. I mean, corruption allegations has dogged him, since his entry into politics after the end of apartheid in 1990. So, and even Nelson Mandela tried to remove him from the leadership of the ANC in the Free State, and Nelson Mandela failed to push Ace Magashule out. Mbeki tried to do that, failed. So, he's an absolute political survivor. So he has survived Nelson Mandela, and he has survived Mbeki, and he himself think he can survive Ramaphosa also. He's been very popular because what he has been doing, he has been very generous in dishing out patronies. Initially in the Free State, when he, because that was his stronghold, but when he became international politics, the General Secretary of the ANC, he also started to dish out patronage at a, on a national scale, and also started moving, supporters of himself and what he demands personal loyalty in return for patronage. So, his couple of years as General Secretary of the party, He's really used that to dish out patronage across the country to key individuals in the party. And when I say patronage, what does it mean? Pushing, people to become candidates, for example, to parliament, because you must remember the general secretary in the ANC is very important, has a very important role in handpicking who would be a candidate for member of parliament or provincial legislature or for the mayors and so on. So he's been pushing his candidates the last couple of years in return for their personal loyalty. So he is a quite formidable support within the ANC.
Well, corruption is a crime. Do you personally believe that we in South Africa are moving towards a state where crime is actually winning, as in, say, for instance, Mexico? I think you referred in one of your talks to that.
Yeah. No, the last couple of years, we've unfortunately gone the route of Mexico in some of those type of countries where, the state have lost control over, parts of society, over almost that, our democracy is being contested. There are parallel governance systems in the country. One, the crime bosses who appear to be above the law, gangsters who appear to be above the law, then, organized formations like taxi organizations, who appear above the law, and even traditional leaders who appear above the law. So, we've got a country, we've become a country where if you are powerful enough within the ANC or outside, you can be above the law. And if you can threaten violence, like our former president, Jacob Zuma, you're also above the law. And the state, which is supposed to be in a democracy, supposed to have the monopoly over violence. In South Africa, unfortunately, the state has lost that monopoly. There are other people who also are in control of violence and who the state actually is afraid of. Now, that's a very dangerous situation. But I think we've been slowly starting to move from that really dire situation. And I think if Ace Magashule is successfully prosecuted, and if Jacob Zuma is successfully prosecuted, I think it will be a turnaround. We maybe then the beginning of the turnaround. So it's been very crucial that those sort of really high-profile individuals who really personify the untouchables in our society, if they get prosecuted, everyone down the chain will start to behave, or would-be criminals would start to be fearful that they would be next.
But how did we get to this point? Must we accept that we are inherently, basically criminals all of us?
No, unfortunately, a bit of our past is part of this, where we are now. Remember when we created a new South Africa in 1994, we built it really on very shaky foundations. We were a violent society before that. The apartheid state was violent, but also the opposition to the apartheid state was also violent. So you almost have violent cultures and a violent counterculture, political counterculture. Then, of course, the Bantustans were also very violent places where, the Bantustan governments were very violent. And then people also protested violently. But many of our cultures, whether, black or white, are very violent cultures. You're a violent society. I mean, I grew up when, we were punished violently if you misbehave, and where violence was seen as a way of, of holding people accountable. So that's how we started. And also, that's the first part, but also the other part that we started, during the anti-apartheid struggle also, sometimes, in these sort of liberation struggles against a dictatorship or the apartheid state, often, rules are set aside, in the struggle. And when we created a new South Africa in 1994, we sort of drawn the line on the past and sort of said, from now onwards, lawlessness, which was useful in the pre-1994 period, it now ends, because now there's a legitimate state and everyone must now follow the law. And then what a new democratic state should have done, sort of enforce, the law, whether irrespective of who is responsible, whether it is a politically connected person or a very rich person. Now, we haven't done that because the ANC, unfortunately, started off where they exempted people from, if you're powerful enough and you're in the ANC, there were a different set of rules. You didn't have to follow the laws of the country or the constitution. As long as you are supporters of the ANC, you could get away essentially with murder. So we did that. So in a way, we were unable to stop the culture of unaccountability of the apartheid years, and we were unable to stop also, within our own different communities, the sort of culture of violence, but also the culture of not following the law. Because if you were in a black opposition, think about it, before 1994, we had boycotts, rage boycotts, those kind of boycotts. And that culture in the new South Africa continued also. So, all of these things helped to create a culture of lawlessness, which unfortunately, there should have been a priority in 1994, where the new government took to power to stop that culture, to say, we drawing the sand in the line in the sand now. This is a new democracy. If you are a citizen here, a democratic citizen, you have to be accountable. You cannot still defy, for example, not paying things, services that you get. If you have done things illegally for whatever reasons during the apartheid era, now you have to formalize it, you have to pay taxes if you run informal businesses and so on. Now we haven't done that. As the ANC, when it came to power, didn't do that.
Now, you from the Foundation Democracy Works, but our democracy is probably not so healthy at the moment. And first of all, apart from a few other things that we'll get to, first of all, it is impossible for Ramaphosa to rule effectively while he's dealing with all of these little dogs yapping at his legs all the time.
That's a sad part of it all. We're sitting as a country, this is the biggest crisis in a generation. There's a COVID-19 is not only a health crisis, of course, because it's a financial crisis. We've seen, record levels of unemployment, business closures, and so on. So we need here a government that is coherent, a government that is wise, a government that is accountable, and a government that is innovative and have the ideas and is effective. Now, Ramaphosa and most of the ANC government is now embroiled in internal battles, political battles in the party. Their eye is not on the ball because their eye is now on the political battles. It is a sad moment for South Africans because that is really the moment where we desperately need effective government. To lead us into the economic recovery, to deal with the unemployment, to come up with solutions to things. But the ANC is so focused, ANC government is so focused on this political battle that they are unable to focus on it.
And then the other thing is the Zondo Commission highlighted the fact that parliamentary democracy is not working as it should, as Parliament is not really taking its job seriously as oversight of the executive.
No, absolutely. And the reason why we are where we are, most probably, and we have to say it, is that our democracy has not been functioning as properly. We say that we've got, among the best democracies and constitutions in the world, but it's on paper. It hasn't worked in reality, and it hasn't worked for a couple of things because there's a lack of accountability in our system. And it starts with our electoral system. The fact that parties, we've got a closed list party candidate system where the party actually chooses the candidates, and the public and the citizens who vote, they vote for a party and they don't vote for candidates, and then they cannot recall those candidates if the candidates sleep in Parliament, or if they are corrupt, or if they do nothing. So that's a real weakness in our democracy, because what then has happened is if you take control of the ANC, like a Jacob Zuma, or now Ace Magashule wants to do exactly the same thing, then you just appoint your own candidates. You put them in the constituencies that you want. whether they live there or not. And in Parliament, they will support you, with everything you do, and so on. And then also, secondly, also we lack accountability also in the public service. And the public service, where again, the ANC as a governing party has the policy of cadre deployment, where it appoints people in the state to key positions in the state. And often they appoint the people to very sophisticated jobs, based on their competency, but mostly based on their loyalty to the ANC. And often the argument among many ANC members and leaders is that if you are a political cadre, you are able to run a complicated engineering firm, for example. So the argument that political experience is enough to manage complicated institutions. So, so lack of accountability in Parliament and then lack of accountability in the state really is the problem. And maybe lastly, is also our citizens are not tough enough on, on their political parties that they vote for, or on the elected representatives. People still vote, unfortunately, not based on competence, on individual's competence, but often based on the past. People struggle credentials and so on. Almost, I think, among many communities, people look at political parties, unfortunately, as if they are soccer clubs, like Orlando Pirates or Kaiser Chiefs, that you have to support through thick and thin, through bad times, good times. Whereas, in a democracy, supporting a political party doesn't work that way. If you're going to support a corrupt political party, it's always going to deliver a corrupt party that won't be able to deliver services for you, won't be able to create jobs for you. I think also, so citizens in South Africa must begin to be much more sophisticated about the way they vote. They should vote for political parties not based on the past, or not based even on color, or based on emotions, but they must vote for them based on their record in power and their competence and on their honesty. And they must also vote for other parties, even if they don't like those other parties, in order to punish their own parties. So if we can get a system or a principle where people will say, well, where an ANC supporter will vote for, say, the DA, even if that person doesn't like the DA, but in order to, to increase effectiveness of public service delivery and to hold his or her own party accountable.
Well, you've referred to the civil service, and probably one of the hurdles awaiting the president at the moment is the fact that COSATU and other unions might go on strike, despite the fact that the country is basically bankrupt. How is it possible to pay, exorbitant fees and salaries if you don't have money?
Absolutely. And, so one of the things about the ANC really, and it's, I think it's a very big weakness that, economic policy capacity is a deficit. There is a deficit in terms of, there's a big understanding about politics, but often not about the economy. And secondly, that people look at the economy very ideological, as almost like as the world is still, or rather, to put it in a different way, many people look through the ANC through the lens of the economy. Many people in the ANC look at the economy through the lens of the Cold War, of the old, the socialist bloc, that kind of Marxist, that kind of old style Soviet Union type of socialist style economics. And of course, that has been discredited. I mean, even the Chinese that is pursuing state socialism, it's not a state socialism, but it's a state capitalism, and so on. So the ANC, unfortunately, many of its leaders are stuck in a really old paradigm before the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was still strong. So they're still thinking in that context. Secondly, also, I think the idea also that people do think that, there is money can be, the state will have a supply, unending supply of money through taxes, of, being able to get taxes from people. I think there's a misunderstanding that, in this economy now, it is people are struggling in this economy. Businesses are collapsing. And also because the ANC's failure to deliver services, many people who can, whether they're white or black, are immigrating. So the people that we don't want to leave this country are leaving, and they're not only taking their skills, but they're also taking their money with them. And there is a poor understanding, I think, within the ANC and within the ANC leadership of these kind of the, let's say, the nuances of the economy. But then also, I think also many state officials and ANC officials are also living, or rather are being remunerated out of kilter with the economy itself, with the size of the economy. So our state sector and our political sector, so it's also elected representatives and state officials, the two groups are being paid out of kilter compared to, the size of our economy, and also compared to our emerging market peers, our peers in other countries. And then secondly, also, both our the political system itself, from a payment point of view, is too large, again, compared to our peers. I mean, we look at our cabinet, we look, at our, the provinces, parliament, the municipalities. I mean, these are vast, systems for a country our size. So not only should the public sector wage being capped and reduced, but also let's call it the political wages, whether in parliament, whether in cabinet, or in provinces, or those in the municipalities, should also be cut or capped or reduced.
Well, then lastly, time flew. Lastly, if you could give President Ramaphosa some advice, what is the most important priority first, would you say?
I think the first priority for me is to understand that the South African government alone cannot take us out of this economic crisis where we are, or out of our political crisis. So that the very first thing for me is for Ramaphosa must bring in, business and civil society and professionals to almost co-govern this country out of the crisis. We're in an emergency right now in our country, and the ANC alone cannot govern us, I think, out of this emergency. Neither can the state, as it is now in a disarray, cannot do that. So to partner with business to deliver services where the state cannot do it, and not to try to marginalize business or civil society or professionals. The second thing is to introduce merit into the state. I mean, for me, that's really important, to look beyond the cadres and party loyalty and color loyalty, but bring in all of South African skills and talent, to help us out of this crisis. I think, despite the fact that we're in a crisis, as a society, there's a lot of talent outside the ANC, and there's a lot of resources outside the state. But those resources can only be galvanized if we bring merit into the governance system and to the political system. And if the ANC is prepared to co-govern, to bring other people in, like business, the private, civil society, professionals, to co-govern and to help. And if we do that, I think we'll have much more hope in the country, because we not only are we in a crisis, we also have another crisis in the country where people are starting to give up hope. And those who can leave, who has the money and the skills, are leaving, creating an even bigger crisis. So first we have to build confidence. And we can only build confidence by dealing with corruption, as I say, partnering with all the talent in the society outside the ANC, and bringing merit into the system. I mean, not genuine merit into the system.
Thank you, Professor. Much appreciated. It was nice talking to you. All of the best.
Thank you. And thank you. All the best to you also. Bye-bye.